Standing there was Logan Bennett, Rachel's ex-fiancé, entering the yard with an ease that made it seem like no time had passed. Logan had a commanding presence, tall, self-assured, and exuding a charm that turned heads. Carrying a bottle of wine, he greeted the hosts warmly, his demeanor unsettlingly familiar. Ethan's heart raced. He knew of Logan. His name had surfaced in past conversations, always laced with caution as Rachel navigated her memories carefully, trying not to dredge up old emotions. Until now, Logan had existed only as a distant figure from Rachel's past, a chapter Ethan believed was closed. But seeing him now, that belief wavered. Rachel tried to mask her unease, but Ethan, attuned to her every gesture, noticed her tension. When Logan approached them, Rachel hesitated briefly before extending her hand. Ethan observed intently while Emily, oblivious to the situation, chatted with her friends. Logan, it's been a while, Rachel said, aiming for a casual tone, though a nervous edge betrayed her. You haven't changed a bit, Rachel, Logan replied with a smile that seemed to carry more meaning than nostalgia. Ethan maintained his composure as he shook Logan's hand, their grip firm but fraught with an unspoken tension. Throughout the evening, Logan mingled effortlessly, but his glances toward Rachel were frequent and unmistakable. Ethan tried to ignore it, yet the discomfort was undeniable, especially when Rachel appeared visibly uneasy. The most unsettling moment occurred on the porch. Ethan noticed Rachel and Logan standing apart from the crowd, engaged in a hushed conversation. Though he couldn't hear their words, Rachel's crossed arms and avoidance of eye contact suggested this was no casual chat. A knot tightened in Ethan's chest. He wasn't typically prone to jealousy, but Logan's presence seemed to stir something in Rachel he had never witnessed before. As night fell and the soft glow of backyard lights illuminated the gathering, Logan prepared to leave. His farewell to Rachel included a hug that to Ethan lingered just a fraction too long. When the gate finally closed behind Logan, Rachel appeared distracted, her thoughts seemingly stuck in the encounter. It was then Ethan realized their peaceful life had been disrupted. Logan Bennett wasn't just a relic of the past, he was here now, bringing with him a challenge Ethan wasn't sure how to confront. In the days following the barbecue, Ethan began noticing subtle changes in Rachel. At first, they were small, a distracted air, as though her mind wandered to distant places. One morning at breakfast, while Ethan and Emily chatted about an upcoming football game, Rachel stirred her coffee absently, her gaze fixed on the swirling liquid. Everything okay? Ethan asked, slinging his work bag over his shoulder. Yes, just tired, Rachel replied with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. But this supposed fatigue seemed more like an excuse, masking a growing distance between them. Rachel began spending more time on her phone, an unusual habit for her. Once, Ethan walked into the living room to find her seated with her phone in hand. She quickly locked the screen and set it aside when she noticed him. Who was that? He asked, striving for a casual tone. Oh, just a friend from work, Rachel said, her voice betraying hesitation. Ethan tried to dismiss the unease, convincing himself he was overthinking. Rachel had never given him a reason to doubt her before. But coincidences began piling up. One evening, Rachel casually mentioned running into Logan at the local market while Ethan was at work. It was a coincidence, she said, chopping vegetables for dinner. He was buying flowers for his wife's grave. We just chatted briefly, nothing important. Though Ethan nodded, the explanation felt hollow, and a lump formed in his throat. Logan's presence felt increasingly inescapable, as if some unseen force was at work. One afternoon, Ethan came home earlier than usual. From the kitchen, he heard muffled laughter. Entering, he found Rachel with her phone, mid-conversation, which abruptly ended when she saw him. Who was that? Ethan asked more pointedly this time. It was Logan, Rachel admitted after a pause. He was just asking about some old friends. It's nothing. Hearing Logan's name directly sent a wave of anger through Ethan. This was the first time Rachel openly acknowledged being in touch with him since the barbecue. It was a small crack, but one Ethan couldn't ignore. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed, Ethan sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall as a flood of thoughts raced through his mind. He replayed the way Logan had looked at Rachel that day. as if she were still someone he couldn't bear to let go of. Now, with Rachel growing more distant and evasive, Ethan's unease deepened into a heavy sense that something fundamental was shifting between them. In the days that followed, the signs became more noticeable. Rachel began leaving the house without offering much explanation. When Ethan asked where she was headed, her responses were vague. "I'm visiting my mom," or "I need to handle something for work." Ordinarily, Ethan wouldn't have questioned her, but now every word felt laced with doubt. Over the next few days, Ethan paid closer attention to Rachel. Every comment she made and every movement seemed weighted with hidden meaning. He debated whether confronting her would help or only push her further away. Then, one quiet afternoon, as Rachel left for yet another unexplained errand, Ethan stayed behind in the kitchen, grappling with the realization that he had reached a turning point. He needed to act, but how could he confront whatever was threatening the life he cherished most? A week later, Rachel finally initiated a conversation. It was a stiflingly humid night in Savannah, the heavy air mirroring the tension that had settled over their home. Ethan sat in the living room, absent-mindedly flipping through a work report when Rachel entered hesitantly. He could sense right away that something serious was coming. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms and avoiding his eyes. Ethan put the paper aside and gestured for her to continue. "What's going on, Rachel?" he asked, keeping his tone steady despite the growing weight in his chest. Rachel hesitated, taking a deep breath as though summoning courage from within. "I don't know how to say this," she began slowly, "but ever since Logan came back, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Thinking about us, about who we were before he showed up." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her. "And what exactly have you been thinking?" he asked, his voice calm, but edged with vulnerability. Rachel looked down at her hands, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I can't ignore the fact that he was a significant part of my life, Ethan. Before you, before everything we've built together, he was my first love. I thought those feelings were gone, but it turns out they were just buried." Her words hit Ethan like a blow. For a moment, he was silent, struggling to process what she had just revealed. "Are you saying you still have feelings for him?" he finally asked, his voice quiet. Rachel nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you, Ethan, but I have to be honest. I think I still love him, but that doesn't mean I don't love you too." Ethan felt his world shatter. Everything he thought he knew about their marriage seemed to unravel before him. Yet the hardest part came next, when Rachel voiced an idea he never expected to hear. "What if," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling as if she was afraid of the words, "what if we tried something different? I believe it's possible to love two people in different ways. Maybe I could split my time between you and Logan. It doesn't have to be all or nothing." Ethan was stunned. He stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she was suggesting. "You're asking me to accept this?" he said finally, disbelief and hurt seeping into his voice. "To just stand by while you decide how to divide your time between me and him?" Rachel tried to explain, but Ethan cut her off, standing abruptly. "No, no, this isn't a marriage. This isn't respect. This..." He paused, taking a deep breath to steady the anger rising within him. "This is betrayal." Rachel broke into tears, but Ethan resisted the urge to console her. In that moment, he knew he needed to think clearly, to make a decision that would protect his dignity, and most importantly, Emily's emotional well-being. The next morning, Ethan made a choice that would change their family forever. He began the process of filing for divorce. The pain was almost unbearable, but he knew he couldn't continue living in such a fractured relationship. When Ethan told Emily about the separation, her reaction was a mix of shock and sorrow. She sat silently for a moment before asking, "It's because of Logan, isn't it?" Ethan, caught off guard by her insight, simply nodded. "I want to stay with you, Dad," Emily said firmly, tears glistening in her eyes. "If she can't choose you, then she doesn't deserve both of us." Her words both broke and strengthened Ethan's heart. Even in the midst of his grief, he knew he had to move forward for Emily's sake. Rachel, meanwhile, seemed stunned by how quickly everything unfolded. She tried to ask for more time, for patience, but Ethan had already made up his mind. For him, there was no going back. The love and trust they had once shared were irreparably broken. As news of the separation spread among friends and neighbors, Ethan braced himself for the inevitable whispers and stares. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he told himself he was ready. In the days following Rachel's departure, the house was filled with an oppressive silence. She temporarily moved in with her mother, leaving Ethan and Emily to adjust to a new reality. The emptiness she left behind was palpable, but Ethan focused on what mattered, caring for Emily and finding stability in the chaos. Mornings were especially hard. Emily, accustomed to seeing both parents together, now found only Ethan in the kitchen. He made a valiant effort to hide his sadness behind lighthearted conversation, but Emily saw the struggle in his eyes. One morning, as she shouldered her backpack for school, she hesitated. "Are you going to be okay, Dad?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Ethan, still in his work uniform, managed a faint smile and nodded. "I'll be okay," he replied, though both of them knew it would take time. Ethan forced a small smile as he reassured his daughter, "I'll be fine, Em, I promise." But deep down, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. At work, he maintained a composed, professional facade, but every task seemed to weigh heavier, as though his mind was split between patrolling Savannah's streets and the haunting emptiness of his home. During a coffee break, he noticed sympathetic glances from coworkers, accompanied by hushed conversations as he walked by. Meanwhile, Rachel and Logan began appearing together at social gatherings. Pictures of the two started circulating online, and mutual friends sent Ethan messages, some offering support, others unintentionally intensifying his pain. One comment in particular lingered in his mind. "You deserve someone who always chooses you first." That weekend, Ethan decided to tackle a project he had been avoiding for a long time, fixing the backyard fence. The physical labor gave him a temporary sense of control amidst the emotional chaos. As he worked, Emily came outside carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She sat quietly on the porch steps, watching him. After a few minutes, her trembling voice broke the silence. "I still don't understand how Mom could do this. It's not fair, you know?" Ethan paused, set his tools aside, and sat next to her. Wiping his hands, he spoke gently. "You're right, Em. It's not fair. I wish I had all the answers for you, but what I can promise is that we'll get through this together, always together." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, and for a while, they sat in silence, finding solace in each other's presence. Gradually, Ethan began piecing his life back together. He started cooking more elaborate dinners with Emily, taking over a role Rachel used to manage. They laughed through attempts at challenging recipes and even laughed harder when desserts went wrong. He also became more involved in Emily's school life, attending parent meetings and cheering her on at team events. Ethan was determined to be the steady foundation his daughter needed. Still, there were nights when loneliness overwhelmed him. Sitting alone in the living room with an untouched glass of wine nearby, he often found himself staring at old family photos on the walls. Those images weren't taken down, not because he couldn't bear to look at them, but because he wasn't ready to erase the memories entirely. They reminded him of what he had lost and what he was striving to rebuild. One evening, during one of these reflective moments, Ethan received an unexpected call from an old friend, Sam, who lived in Atlanta. Having heard about the divorce, Sam invited Ethan to visit, suggesting it might help clear his mind. The idea of leaving Savannah, even briefly, was appealing. Ethan desperately needed a break from the emotional weight of home. The following Monday, after dropping Emily off at school, Ethan hit the road for Atlanta. As he drove, he felt a mixture of relief and guilt for taking this brief escape. When he arrived, Sam greeted him warmly and showed him around the city. Their conversations covered everything, except Rachel, something Ethan greatly appreciated. The 2 days in Atlanta felt like a breath of fresh air, offering a glimpse of peace amidst the storm. Returning to Savannah, Ethan felt slightly renewed. He knew the challenges ahead were far from over, but he carried a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for Emily. She needed him to be strong, and he was determined to fulfill that role, even when the weight of it all seemed unbearable. A few weeks later, as Ethan began settling into a new routine, an unexpected message from Rachel disrupted his fragile peace. The message was brief but heavy with implications. Ethan, can we talk? It's important. Ethan wrestled with how to respond, delaying for hours as his mind churned over the possibilities of what she might say. Eventually, driven by curiosity and a sense of obligation, he agreed, suggesting they meet at a park near their former home, a neutral ground, free from the painful memories of the house they had shared. That evening, under a sky painted orange by the setting sun, Ethan approached the bench where Rachel was waiting. She looked uneasy, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the ground. When she noticed him, she looked up, and the expression on her face revealed the weight of what she was about to say. "Thank you for coming," Rachel began, her voice unsteady. Ethan crossed his arms, keeping his distance both physically and emotionally. "What do you want, Rachel?" he asked bluntly. She let out a deep sigh before speaking, choosing her words carefully. "I made a mistake, Ethan. A huge mistake!" Ethan didn't respond immediately, refusing to ease the tension. She continued, her voice breaking. "Logan! I thought being with him would make sense, that he was what I'd been missing. But he's not. He never was. I was blinded by nostalgia, by a fantasy that never really existed." Her words stirred conflicting emotions in Ethan: anger, sadness, and perhaps a touch of relief. But he remained composed. "And you're just realizing this now? After tearing apart our family?" he asked, his voice steady but laden with pain. Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she nodded. "I regret everything. Hurting you, putting Emily through this. None of it was worth it. I want to fix things, Ethan. I want our family back." Her desperate plea lingered in the air. For months, Ethan had wondered if she would ever acknowledge the damage she had done. Now, here she was, full of remorse and asking for something he wasn't sure he could offer. "Rachel," he began, his tone firm but calm, "you don't understand the depth of what you've done. This isn't just about what happened between you and Logan. It's about trust. It's about respect. You asked me to accept something I never could. And now you want to come back, as if that will erase everything?" She sobbed harder, his words cutting deeply. "I know I've ruined everything, Ethan, but I love you. I always have. Please, let me fix this." Ethan turned his gaze toward the lake, where the last rays of sunlight reflected off the water. For a brief moment, he considered the possibility. Could he forgive her? Could he overlook the pain for the sake of their family? But then he remembered the lonely nights, staring at the empty ceiling, and the heartbreak of explaining Rachel's absence to Emily. He remembered the strength it had taken to move forward, and the promise he had made to himself to never let his peace be shattered again. Finally, he turned back to Rachel. "I don't doubt that you're sorry," he said, his voice steady. "But some things once broken can't be fixed. I've started to rebuild my life, to find peace. And that peace, it doesn't include us being together." Rachel's hopeful expression crumbled as his words sank in. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, but Ethan felt an unexpected sense of relief. Saying those words wasn't easy, but he knew they were necessary. Ethan offered a faint smile and said gently, "I hope you find peace, Rachel, for your own sake and especially for Emily." Rachel nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I understand, Ethan. I'm so sorry," she replied. He didn't answer, choosing instead to stand and walk away, leaving her sitting on the bench, alone with her thoughts and regrets. The evening sky had darkened, and the flickering streetlights cast a dim glow, illuminating the path Ethan knew he had to take alone. In the days following his conversation with Rachel, Ethan experienced a mixture of relief and sadness. Though he was certain he had made the right choice, it didn't ease the weight of the journey ahead. At night, the quiet house felt emptier than ever. Emily tried her best to fill the void with her presence, but Ethan knew she was grappling with her own emotions about the separation. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing a work report, Emily walked in carrying an old photo album she'd discovered in the closet. Without saying a word, she sat beside him and began flipping through its pages. The pictures showed moments from a simpler time: birthday celebrations, beach outings, and everyday memories that now felt so distant. "Do you miss it?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. Ethan sighed, closing the file. He knew she needed honesty, even if it hurt. "Yes, I do," he admitted. his eyes lingering on a photo of Rachel holding baby Emily. But sometimes missing something doesn't mean we should go back to it. Sometimes the best thing we can do is move forward. Emily pondered his words before responding. I think I'm starting to understand that. That brief exchange marked a turning point for them both. Ethan realized that despite the pain, he and Emily were rebuilding something invaluable, a deeper trust and a stronger bond. They were learning to rely on one another in ways they never had before. Meanwhile, Rachel began to fade from their daily lives. She stopped reaching out and seemed to accept the new reality. Logan disappeared entirely. No public appearances, no social media updates. It was as if he had never been there, though the consequences of his presence lingered in everyone's lives. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, Ethan came across Emily's old bicycle. He decided to fix it up, and when Emily returned from school and saw what he was doing, her face lit up. "Dad, are you fixing my bike?" she asked, amazed. "I thought it might be nice to go for a ride, like we used to," Ethan said, wiping grease from his hands. That weekend, they went to the park together and spent hours riding, laughing, and enjoying themselves like they hadn't in a long time. For Ethan, the outing was more than just fun. It was a sign that he and Emily were finding their way to a new normal. Later that evening, Ethan received an invitation he hadn't expected. A colleague was organizing a charity event at the community center and encouraged him to attend. Initially hesitant, Ethan decided it was time to reconnect with the world outside his home and work. The event had a warm and lively atmosphere. The hall buzzed with conversations, laughter, and activity as attendees participated in auctions and socialized. Ethan spent some time greeting familiar faces and engaging in small talk. It was there that he met Laura, a volunteer helping to run the event. Laura had an easy smile and a friendly demeanor that immediately put Ethan at ease. "You look a little out of place," she teased, handing him a glass of lemonade. Ethan chuckled. "Maybe I am, but I think this is exactly what I needed." The two spent much of the evening talking. Laura, a local history teacher, shared stories about the community with enthusiasm and humor. Their conversation felt natural and unpressured, giving Ethan a rare sense of ease. When Ethan returned home that night, he found Emily still awake, watching a movie in the living room. "How was it?" she asked, switching off the TV. "It was good," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "I met some interesting people." Emily smirked. "Interesting people? Or one interesting person?" Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "One step at a time, Em." In the months that followed, Ethan made small but meaningful strides forward. He started going out more, both with Emily and on his own. His connection with Laura grew, but he didn't rush into anything, keeping his focus on Emily and rebuilding his life. Rachel, on the other hand, chose a quieter path. She distanced herself from the city, and Logan, dedicating time to personal reflection and self-care. Through mutual acquaintances, Ethan heard that she was seeking help to work through her issues, and he genuinely hoped it would lead her to the peace she needed. By the following spring, Ethan and Emily organized a small barbecue in their backyard, a tradition they hadn't revived since their lives had fallen apart. On a calm afternoon in the suburbs of Savannah, Georgia, Deputy Sheriff Ethan Harris enjoyed a rare moment of peace. He stood beside his wife, Rachel, and their 16-year-old daughter, Emily, at a backyard barbecue hosted by close friends. The gathering had all the familiar elements: tables draped with checkered cloths, barefoot children running about, and the distinct aroma of grilled food mingling with laughter and animated chatter. These were the moments Ethan cherished most, where the weight of work faded and he could simply be a husband, father, and neighbor. As Ethan mingled with the guests, something caught his eye. Rachel was staring intently at the front gate, her expression frozen, as though she had seen a ghost. Curious, Ethan followed her gaze.